It is too easy to become a chameleon and just blend in, to try to adopt fully the language of business. And then you not only lose track of maybe your perspective, which is very valuable as a designer in a big company, but also you might start to be perceived then as less able to bring a little bit more of a blue sky thinking, retain the ability to both be perceived as a little bit different and also behave a little bit. Agencies don't recognize how much value they can bring on the company side if they just recognize how little some of the marketers or other business people really understand about design. There's a significant number of people who may have only been exposed to design through the lens of certain projects. My team also plays the role of trying to do a little bit of matchmaking between teams and agencies and internal teams, just to make sure that we can calibrate and fill some of those gaps with regards to understanding the process of design.
Packaging design should seduce, inform, and even save the planet. I'm Hernan Braverman, and this is Branderman, the podcast where I talk with experts to uncover what it actually takes to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society. Warning: keep this podcast out of the reach of close-minded marketers and designers. Before the interview, let me introduce my design agency.
Brands with purpose. Human, agile, honest brands that leave no one indifferent. Tridimage creates and revitalizes brands to imagine and shape the future. Tridimage, the branding and packaging design agency for bold brands.
Today I had the pleasure to speak with Ximena O'Reilly, Global Head of Design at Nestlé. Since her arrival at Nestlé in 2013, Ximena has spearheaded a design revolution, introducing innovative work methodologies, digital tools and dynamic resource models. Together with her team, she ensures every department, regardless of its function, is equipped to drive brand-building activities, emphasizing the critical role of brand identity and design. In this episode, Ximena shares her remarkable journey, transitioning from the agency side to the client side of the industry. We explore the fascinating world of crafting a brand communication standard that engages all five senses, and how backstories are intricately woven into product packaging, creating powerful brand narratives. Additionally, we reflect on the unique challenges and experiences Ximena has encountered as a woman in both the corporate and design realms. Today with me, Ximena O'Reilly. Each of us is a container of ideas, projects, and dreams. However, we can't read the label when we are inside the jar. Ximena, what do you think your label says, or what would you like it to say?
I love this question, but it's a tricky one because I think that labels tend to be like a mono surface, right? And everybody is multi-layered. The best labels allow you to see a little bit beneath the surface or maybe through the surface. And for me, I think my label would probably say what I do on the label, say where I'm maybe from, because it's a little bit complicated, but maybe see through it to what I love, which is I love nature, I love creativity. I think that we all have the things that we love in the background of who we are and what we do. I would prefer the label to be able to allow people to see through all of the layers, to see more about who I am.
Building a brand is like a journey. It starts with defining where we are and asking ourselves where we want to go. What was the path that led you from studying East Asian studies to leading brand and design consultancies, then reimagining brands for Mondelez, to now leading the global design vision at Nestlé?
It goes back to the sort of nomadic lifestyle that I had as a child. My parents were very adventurous, and so we lived in many different countries. And that led me to be very curious about cultures and people. And I was always drawing. I didn't know it at the time, but I read a lot, voraciously, in fact, and I was always drawing. I started to learn Japanese when I was in high school. That led me to doing a homestay, an exchange program when I was 16 for one summer in Japan, Tokyo. I suppose I didn't really know it at the time, but one of the things that really fascinated me was there's the little stuff sometimes when you're traveling. It becomes that thing that you remember the most beyond, of course, the people and the relationships that you make. But what fascinated me from that trip when I was 16 was I would go shopping with my host mother. It was all the packaging and the wrapping. It's a true ritual in Japan. Even things that seemingly don't have a lot of worth are beautifully packaged. I remember being fascinated by that, just the beauty of the paper and the patterns and the layers, even for the most humble of things. I remember that was super inspiring. Now, how did I get from there? I say it's very circuitous. I went to a liberal arts undergraduate college in the US, a very lovely one called Pomona College. I really wasn't sure what I was going to study. I knew I was interested in people and culture and history, but then my focus became East Asian studies simply because I was super interested in Japanese culture at the time. And then I started to become very interested in transnational identity. And I think I was honestly in my 20s trying to figure out who I was because I had been born in Chile, grew up in Europe, then moved to the US, and gone to a few other places along the way. And so sometimes it's easier to try to make sense of things through the lens of someone else, a group of people that, of course, I was not Japanese, but I was super interested in Japanese history, Japanese culture, and also migration of Japanese around the world. And then after undergraduate, I started in publishing. And then I had a fortuitous run-in with someone who became very influential in my life, who was an architect and was involved in designing a new space for a design agency. And so said, what interests you about publishing? Like, why don't you go into design? You seem to be more interested in the design work that you're doing. I got contacted by someone who was working at an agency called Landor. And they were having some sort of cultural issues with one of their clients who was a Brazilian client at the time and knew that I spoke a little Portuguese and I knew a little bit about America. Everything started to click. All of a sudden, this area where I really liked design, but I felt like there was this academic and learned experience side of understanding the world or being curious about the world, curious about people, understanding a few different languages. And here I was asked in this agency in San Francisco to help connect the dots. And that sort of opened my eyes to this world of branding. And that led to then working at an agency called Interbrand. And then another agency that brought me over to Switzerland, back to a country I'd lived as a child to work. It was an agency called LPK, working with one of their big clients, was Procter & Gamble. And after a few years there, I was approached for a role at what was Kraft Foods at the time to have a role as a design leader in their European operations. But what led me to the client side of the business. And then a few years later, Nestlé reached out. So a long journey that I don't think I ever anticipated as that 16-year-old, fascinated with really beautiful handcrafted packaging in Japan.
What do you miss from the agency life and what do you love about the in-house design environment?
I miss having this sort of messy, multidisciplinary approach to trying to solve projects where you can just get so excited and work in a less structured way. Sometimes it goes a little off the rails, but this combination of experiences and creativity, whether it be designers or strategists or production or the account people, all coming together and trying to really solve a problem. That energy I do miss, because while on the client side, you have that in different forms and there are different types of disciplines that come together.
Yeah.
But it tends to be much more structured, 1 hour for this, 2 hours for that, maybe a workshop for this. And And that sort of more free-flowing creativity is something which is more rare, at least in the companies that I've worked at. But on the other hand, I think what I really appreciate about being on the company side is I have greater line of sight and insight into what the ultimate ambition could or should be, as well as what are some of the barriers that is a little bit more opaque when you're on the agency side. Some of those barriers can be tangible barriers, lack of budget or timeline or constraints on if it's something to get printed or printing side of things, etc. But it could also be some of the stakeholders, the different levels of approvals. That is sometimes really difficult when you're on the agency side to anticipate, and it's a little easier when you're on the inside.
What are some of the design lessons you have learned over the years in your role as global head of design at large corporations?
It's to quite quickly understand the language and the culture of the company where you're working at, but also retain the ability to both be perceived as a little bit different and also behave a little bit. It is too easy to become a chameleon and just blend in, to try to adopt fully the language of business. And then you not only lose track of maybe your perspective, which is very valuable as a designer in a big company,
Yeah.
but also you might start to be perceived then as less able to bring a little bit more of a blue sky thinking. I think another lesson is agencies don't recognize how much value they can bring on the company side if they just recognize how little some of the marketers or other business people really understand about design. This is not across the board general truth, but there's a significant number of people who may have only been exposed to design through the lens of certain projects. I think now if I were to ever go back to the agency side and meeting a client for the first time, I would really try to understand the level of design experience, design knowledge, and design maturity, because then you can accommodate and decide, in fact, whether or not as an agency, you have the patience and tolerance if your client is at a lower level of maturity, or maybe you put sort of different resources in place to partner to help bring up the level of understanding, versus maybe you've got a client who actually has a depth of experience. And so then it's really much more of a partnership. And in a large company like Nestlé, we have all of that spectrum.
Yeah, I guess so.
So my team also plays the role of trying to do a little bit of matchmaking between teams and agencies and internal teams, just to make sure that we can calibrate and fill some of those gaps with regards to understanding the process of design.
If you could relive a moment in your life related to your career, what would it be?
Honestly, I think that the first 6 months when I arrived at Nestlé was one of the highlights. And if I could relive it, I would enjoy it just as much, but I would probably do some things a little bit differently, because in those first 6 months, I had the amazing opportunity to travel a lot around the world and get exposed to how different Nestlé is, both in terms of the brands, but also a little bit of the culture and the ways of working in different parts of the world, whether it's the Philippines or India, US or Brazil or Mexico or around Europe or Middle East. Such vast differences. And it very quickly made me realize the opportunity, but also the vastness, right, of the challenge ahead.
What do you think of the professional you are when you look in the mirror?
I'm, of course, proud of what I've been able to achieve. I'm sometimes a little bit mystified and puzzled at what I'm doing, to be very honest. But I'm also conscious of the fact that I have been told by both designers, but also women, that I've been a role model. That's probably the piece that makes me the most proud looking in the mirror, because I don't fit squarely into the corporate mold. I don't try to. I try to be myself and bring myself. And I'm quite an introverted person. And in a big corporate setting, that can be challenging, but I've learned to live with that. But being able to do that and also, do quite well in my career, I think is gratifying to me. But I think it's also really nice, I think, for others, especially younger women who might also feel like, is there really opportunities to climb a ladder like Nestlé? And indeed there is.
What challenge did you face as a woman in the corporate and design industry?
For many years, I was one of the few women who might have been in meetings or in situations of trying to influence some decisions, especially in the corporate world. As I said, it has changed, which is great. But definitely when I started at Nestlé, it was a very male environment. And then when I was on the agency side, frequently the main decision makers on the client side were men. It's a challenge because you can't help but second guess how you're presenting yourself in that sort of an environment. But it's also, I think that the opportunities today are evolving. I guess you could say I'm optimistic of change, but there's still a huge amount that needs to be done.
Yeah. Can you describe the brand building process you introduced at Nestlé? How do you establish the strategic framework for your brands, and then how you ensure that it cascades to all of the markets?
About 15 years ago, there was a construct called Brand Building Nestlé Way that was introduced. And it was really good at looking at who's the consumer and what's the brand strategy. But there really wasn't room for understanding the brand identity or design. The first thing that I did was I introduced something that's become the 5 senses. Actually, it was a very lazy way of naming it because I thought that we would probably rename it, but it stuck. And that was my sneaky way of trying to get more than just the marketers to talk about the brand identity and the brand expression. So we invited the R&D teams, the product developers, different agency types, not just the design and the creative agencies, but also digital agencies, to really spend time thinking about how to bring the brand strategy to life, the brand essence, through the lens of the 5 senses, so that we could artificially pull the senses apart and then construct sort of a vision of how we would want people to feel about the brand in the future. That then becomes a less subjective exercise to then look back at how your brand is actually behaving today. And then you can go down to the level of logos and colors and materials and sounds and all of that. It just gives that little bit more of a tangible vision of what you might want to have people feel about your brand in the future. So that was the first thing that we addressed. Then we brought in a design process. Process is super important, especially in a big company that has loads of processes, but design didn't. And so what we were finding was that there were just so many times when great design was compromised because there was not enough time, or certain key stakeholders were brought in at too late a stage, etc. So now we have a design process. It's called design to delivery, and it's anchored in our innovation and renovation process. And that really gives space to upfront design discovery, the design creation process, and then production, adaptation, and then finally the more technical end of realizing that design. So we have that, and that's been fantastic. And I say that the most recent thing that we've started to look at is improving our design briefs, which I think is a challenge. So how do we do that in such a way that it becomes easier for people who might not be designers to participate in cracking that very concise articulation of what we're aiming to achieve, and then have something that you can use to really judge and evaluate designs in a much less subjective manner. But also looking at what we call portfolio architecture, which the industry might recognize as brand architecture, but really getting down to that level of connecting between the brand strategy through to your articulation of the brand identity, deciding what are the different pillars of both your current and your future portfolio, but articulating that around the needs of different consumers. And then going down to the level of what are the different brand properties and behavioral aspects of both the product and the brand and service experience that help frame how a innovator or a design agency might then bring the experience to life. You asked, how do we go from developing sort of the brand building and all the way from strategy all the way through to then influencing how it comes to market? That's super difficult.
Yeah.
And we're still working on it, but it's really making sure that our agencies, the right agencies, are put in that position of not only creating and developing the brand experience, but then codifying it so that then we can put it into guidelines, and we're moving all of our guidelines into digital guidelines. Then we can connect those digital guidelines to the most recent assets. And then so that we can have some analytics to understand who's using these assets. And then, of course, tying to the world of how we can look at the actual performance of the designs so that we can have eventually, a really nice virtual circle of being able to feedback in to understand what could trigger a redesign in the future.
Interesting. So how do you balance brand identity and packaging expression at Nestlé?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's really becoming blurred. I think that most of our brands at Nestlé, still the most important touch point is the packaging. If you think of a brand like Nespresso, that is not the case. But most of our brands are still trying to sell themselves on a very cluttered shelf, whether that be a physical or a digital shelf. And the package needs to do a lot. And then the way that you recognize the brand across other channels needs to link to the way that consumers recognize the package. That's why when we do an analysis of packaging, we usually are also doing an analysis of the brand identity across the most predominant of touch points, because we cannot really impact the packaging unless we are thinking about the impact that might have across all of the different channels.
Design can be noticed, connect, be relevant, add excitement to the mundane. Design can change opinions and nudge positive behaviors. Design can meaningfully communicate purpose.
Ximena, can you describe in more detail the 5 senses process?
We started it back before COVID. And back in those days, we would do some pre-work. Usually the design agency would do work on identifying some of the key trends. There would be a review of how the brand was coming to life across different touch points. And then there would be, if there were studies already done, some research on the way that consumers were relating to the brand or to different points of the brand experience, we would do that as pre-work. Then we would actually have physical sessions, and those sessions were wonderful. So we always do an immersion in 5 senses, but those immersions usually are around, how do we want people to feel about the brand in the future, which might not be the way that people feel about the brand today, especially when you're re-articulating the brand strategy. It's about taking a leap into the future to understand, okay, if we really want people now to be thinking about this brand as being a brand that maybe is perceived as being quite mainstream, but we want to move it into a place where it is perceived as more premium, maybe more adult, more indulgent, then what is the place that we can even hold our session that could evoke some of those feelings? So we've done all kinds of sessions in different places. Some of them have been in sort of luxury resorts to get that feel of premiumness. Some have been, we did a wonderful one in Brazil. We did it with an earshot of a kindergarten, so we could hear the sounds of kids playing. For a brand that is really anchored in early childhood. We've done some 5 senses where we have visited open air markets. We've done so many things. So that's been really rich. We still do some in person. But what happened with COVID was something which was already happening before because travel budgets were getting quite scrutinized. But what we did is we embraced mural and we recreated our process in a number of sort of templates that just served as a tool to enable us to use this virtual dimension of teams, but to try to achieve the same. And of course, there you have to break it down into a number of sub segments, because sitting in front of a computer for maybe 8 hours is not so much fun. But we always also try to introduce this notion of an experience. So we sometimes, for some of them, we send kits in advance so that people individually can have an experience with the brand, whether it be an actual physical experience or a cooking experience, or again, something that might take you to a space where you can imagine better where we would want people to be thinking about the brand in the future. So we've done that. We've also done some sort of live via Teams experiences. It's a little funny. And now that we can travel again, we are seeing that we're able to incorporate more people because we do these experiences in a hybrid setting. The fact that I think that we have cracked how to do things virtually in a multi-sensory way, which is not easy, has allowed us to now have a smaller group that can travel or who might be already located in one location to then have this sort of hybrid fluid experience with those who cannot travel. So the outcome of it ends up with, you could call it mood boards, but it's really trying to identify sights and sounds and other expressions of the sense of each of the individual sense that then can start to help you understand what we are trying to achieve, and then articulating that through the lens of different principles. They are principles that start with a narrative, but then get more and more succinct, so that eventually we get to a place where we can include the 5 senses in what we call our brand communication standard, which is essentially the guidelines for the brand, so that anyone who did not participate in the session comes onto the brand in 2 years' time, can pick it up, and they can feel that 5 senses and understand. You use it as a judgment criteria when they're looking at any kind of new experience that we might be creating for the brand, whether it be packaging, whether it be shopper activation, whether it be TV campaign. Just always have in the background not just the brand essence and the brand strategy, but also this layer of, hey, but this is how we want people to feel about the brand.
That process is part of the brief creation process, or is it a later stage?
It's earlier, actually. So it either exists already, and so then it's brought into a new brief. So it's always as a reference. Or if the brief itself is to much more strategic, then the 5 senses, we have at times revisited our 5 senses. If they were done based on a strategy that has since evolved, then we go back and we might not start the 5 senses from scratch, but we call it design discovery. So in the design discovery phase is when we would look at the 5 senses. Is it still robust? Does it still meet our needs? And if not, then we either develop it from scratch or we just revitalize it.
How did you readdress the way Nestlé organizes information in the secondary panels in a consumer-centric manner?
This predates me at Nestlé, but for years we had something called the nutritional compass, which was a way of making sure that all information on the secondary panels linked back to Nestlé and was really organized around nutrition. And that made sense, I think, back when it was designed, because at the time, Nestlé was really trying to make sure, and we were one of the first to really make sure that everybody could see the nutritional information. But nowadays, with so much information that we want to include on our packs, we had to rethink, and especially because we wanted to make sure that all of the great actions that our brands were taking against our brand purpose was made clear to consumers. So if we were doing a lot of work on the packaging materials or on working with local communities or working on the reformulation of the product, all of that good stuff, how could we do it in such a way that was both understandable, so not a lot of technical terms, but really being consumer-centric in the sense of, okay, let's break this down so that it can be engaging and understandable. Link to Nestlé to make sure that we are very proud to make all consumers aware of who is the company behind all of our products. But then that if we're giving some space on a secondary panel to our brands with purpose storytelling, then something has to give, right? Because there's just too much information to put on the pack. So we ended up calling the way that we address our secondary panels the backstory, because every movie has a backstory. Every character in a book has a backstory, right? So what's the backstory of a singular product? Well, it is a combination of things. It is, of course, the brands with purpose storytelling that we want to make sure people see and understand and can react to. But it is also the backstory of the ingredients. It's the nutritionals. It's maybe the provenance. It's how can I recycle or dispose? What's the preparation instructions? So all of that, we have developed a system that allows each brand to bring it to life so that it works within the brand identity of that product brand. But think about it in terms of it's an invisible framework that then just gets the skin of the brand put on it. But it allows us to structure the information in such a way that we hope to not compromise so much on where things are placed and how understandable or readable the information is. It's a challenge. There's just too much information. We now have a strategy for how to look at expanding the experience beyond the secondary panels in a consistent and coherent way through the use of QR codes. So we call it connected packaging, but it's recognizing that no matter how good the design, how well structured the information is, you're still going to get to a point where you just have too much information that if you're truly consumer centric, then you need to make sure that consumers have a way of getting to the information that they need or they want, as opposed to the sort of pre-selection of information that we have managed to fit on a lowly pack.
What defines a great package design agency for you?
I think it's a combination of great strategy, great creativity, and great partnership. Those are three variables that just without one, it becomes difficult. Then, like transversely, maybe this falls under partnership, but it's also the ability to have a voice at every stage of a project and to challenge. And of course, that is the responsibility, I think, of the client to make sure that ability to challenge is always welcomed. But yeah, I would say that those are the three most important areas for me.
When do you think is the right time to undertake a redesign or package update?
Iteration that is fundamentally changing things continuously, just because maybe it's a new brand manager that has stepped in or the last redesign didn't work out quite as well. I think that's the wrong reason to change anything. I actually prefer a lot more rigor in understanding what's working and what's not, and to do a lot of due diligence first before deciding even, is it the right time to make some big changes in the packaging design? Because it might be that the first stage is a cleanup job. There have been a lot of sort of awkward iterations over the years, and to change everything dramatically, especially for a large global brand that is in many markets, could be, a recipe for disaster. So in those situations, it's about getting to a place where you course correct some things that have gone a little bit off the rail, so that then you can set a strategy for, okay, next 3 years, we're going to work on how we can get to the next level of design for this particular brand. So I would say for me, it's definitely the best practice when it comes to very large brands. Then I'd say for younger brands, it's about course correcting as soon as possible. So it's almost the opposite. If something isn't working, I think you don't have the baggage of and the burden of unpicking a lot of codes that have been embedded over the years with different types of consumers in different markets. So there it's recognizing early that maybe the ambition wasn't bold enough. Maybe the strategy could change so immensely that you need to rethink, and that's worth the investment.
What is the worst design crime you have ever seen or perhaps committed?
The worst design crime? Oh my goodness. Oh, there are so many. No, I think there are design criminals in our midst everywhere. I think that there are two kinds of crimes that really make my skin crawl. One is when a marketer or business person art directs back to the design agency. It's the lack of ability to articulate what they're finding challenging in a design or why it doesn't quite meet their needs. To immediately go to that space of, oh, could you move this around and make this bigger? And, and I recently saw something that was feedback that got escalated to me because it was so precise. It was make the logo 20% larger and move it. And that to me has just no place in a relationship between a design professional and a professional company, right? Because we are working with design agencies and branding agencies because of their competency. And if we can't take the time to think about how we give the feedback, then that relationship is flawed. That's a big crime. I think another type of crime, maybe I just keep it at that actually, because I could go on. I mean, wow, now we could have like a whole nother podcast on this. This would be actually fun with a bunch of design leaders, is to sort of trade like the worst offenses.
Yeah.
What is sort of like go straight to jail,
Yeah. Ximena, I have a proposal for you. Let's play a game. As you are aware, a table tennis table is often found in creative studios. Here how it's work. I will ask you a series of quick questions and you will need to choose between two concepts. If you'd like, you can also explain your reasoning behind each choice. Are you ready for Brandersman Ping Pong?
I am ready.
I am a designer or I am a consultant?
Interesting. I think for an agency, I'm considered a consultant. At work, I'm a designer. In my heart, I'm a designer.
Close brief or blue sky brief?
Blue sky. I thrive on blue sky thinking and blue sky briefs. But when it comes to the way that our brands should be writing briefs, or our brand managers, it should be definitely much more close in. But personally, it's all about blue sky.
Nice. Creative strategist or strategic designer?
Strategic designer.
A creation project or a redesign project?
The ping pong ball just hit the net. No, because I find them both fascinating. So I can't choose that one, Hernan.
Okay. Focus groups or gut feelings?
Gut feelings. There's a role for focus groups, but you got to have gut feeling.
Mass market or premium market?
I would say mass. I mean, many of the products and brands that I work on are actually considered premium. But what I actually love about some of the work that I've done throughout my career is that it is about trying to communicate and present products and innovation to a wide audience. And I find that super, super interesting and challenging.
Big established brand or small emerging brand?
I think I'm going to have to go with a big brand, although I've worked on both and I love both.
Conceptualization or execution?
Conceptualization. Every designer is so concerned with the execution, right? So I have a lot of appetite to make sure that there is oversight all the way through to the end execution, because there's no point in doing great creative design if it doesn't get executed. But definitely the focus is more upstream.
Label design or bottle design?
I think label.
Forms follow function or forms follow emotion?
Oh, I'd say both, but I'm leaning more on the emotion side.
Leading designers or continuing to design all your life?
I really like leading designers.
remote work or face-to-face work?
Oh, that's a hard one. I love face-to-face, but you know what? I think that hybrid or virtual, there's so much power in that. I have connected with so many more people, whether it be at work or on the agency side, where there isn't this pressure to have to do things face-to-face. I'm more remote now.
Interesting. A patch of another agency that you would have liked to have designed?
Oh, this is going to probably sound obvious, but every time I see an Oatly package, I love how they've thought about every detail. You know, the copywriting is brilliant and the placement of the information and of course the design, and no matter like what new product they come up with, everything is considered to the same level. So very, very envious of that.
A collaboration with another creative or agency that you would like to do?
We have been involved in an alliance called Design for Good that brings together designers from lots of different companies, including some competitors. What's been amazing about that is our designers get to collaborate with designers from different industries on solving real world problems. The whole concept of Design for Good is to work on a UN Sustainable Development Goal and collaborate and end up with a design that can be available open source to anybody. But the reason I'm telling you this is that I actually would really like at some point to collaborate with someone who works in a completely different industry, because I see such benefit in that. I think that our collaborations tend to be with agencies that have deep expertise in CPG, in food and beverage, and there's huge value in that. But I think it'd be great to shake that up sometimes.
And finally, great designers are born or great designers are made?
I would say made. You have to be born with some way of looking at the world, which leads you in the direction of design. But I have seen so many great designers who have come from all different paths to get to the place where they are amazing designers or creatives or design strategists. So I would go with made.
Ximena, what wisdom have you gained in the process of being part of the advisory council of Design for Good?
If we bring, in this case, it's about 600 designers together, working virtually. All of them are working remote in small groups. They never have met in person. And if we partner them up with the right development organizations, the power of their ideas, their ability to use their skills to come up with solutions that anybody on a nonprofit side could bring to life is phenomenal. But one of the reflections is how, when you're on the side of being on the Alliance Council, is how can we make sure that we are nurturing and nourishing those designers so that they're getting the right level of mentorship as they're going through that process, both in terms of how they collaborate with each other and with the development organizations, but also the company that they come from, in our case, Nestlé. Are we doing enough to give them the support so that it isn't eating into their personal time? They can do it within the ability to squeeze it into their work at Nestlé. That's been a very interesting experience because it's taken me out of my day to really think about passionately, how can we enable this amazing collaboration, but also what are some of the real world challenges that can come in the way of them being able to get to their final solutions.
Looking ahead, what trends do you anticipate shaping the future of our industry? How do you imagine the term package design will evolve?
Well, the year is 2023, and I think that I would be remiss not to talk about artificial intelligence. The shifts moving forward are going to be, how do we make sure that our brands have very firm foundations? So we know strategically what they stand for. what their brand identity and expression is or should be, or what the parameters are of how it can evolve, and how can we codify all of that, not only to make sure that as we look to make sure that the way that we have brand experiences across touch points can both be dynamic and shift and adjust, but also be highly consistent and coherent. How can we do that at pace, at speed, and leveraging technology? And AI plays a role in that. But AI is not the solution. The solution is how can we make sure that we are organizing ourselves both internally and also by extension with our agency partners to be able to take advantage of all of these shifts and not lose sight of our consumers and our brands in the process.
What do you think designers should unlearn and relearn?
You know, it's interesting because my eldest son has just graduated from design school, actually.
Wow.
And I was just at his university's graduation, which is a design school. So it was amazing to be in the audience, watch all of these young creatives from different creative disciplines go through their graduation. And what struck me is just how much optimism and fearlessness they have. They're not fearful of having an opinion and expressing it and trying things. And I think that designers, as they go through their career, should unlearn the filters that maybe have come in to maybe reduce their capacity to be as free and optimistic and as bold and fearless as when they're freshly minted coming out of a university.
What is something that people don't know about you that if they did, they would be surprised?
People think I'm American, and I have a little bit of an accent, and I'm not. I'm born in Chile, but I actually have an Irish citizenship and English citizenship. And I'm currently in the process of becoming a Swiss citizen. So that's a surprise. And I think I will always feel like I belong to the tribe that I feel most comfortable in, rather than a geographical location. I hope someone from the Swiss government is not listening right now because I do love Switzerland, but I feel very comfortable in different places. And the notion of nationality is becoming so important again. And I'm in conflict with it, to be honest. I think that it builds barriers. Our world is so fragile. We can't afford these barriers right now.
Yeah. What is the most important thing on your to-do list for your professional life? What is your next adventure?
Look, I think that this work that we're doing with Design for Good, I'm not sure where it's going to lead for me personally, but I do know that this work, plus some of the work that we've been doing, I described on the backstory, but also some work that we're doing to make sure that we're really embracing purpose at the core of everything that we're designing at Nestlé. It's something that I love doing, and I love doing it at the scale that we're doing it at Nestlé. But at some stage, I think that I might want to see myself go back down to focusing on fewer brands, maybe more singular experience, and maybe just be able to go a little bit deeper and see things through all the way.
Ximena, thanks for this fantastic conversation and for sharing your backstory. Your professional journey began with learning Japanese, and along the way you have explored the realms of French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish. Thanks for guiding us through the intricacies of design and ensuring that we don't get lost in translation.
Hernan, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really fun and a real pleasure. I would be totally game to get a bunch of designers around a virtual table to talk about the crimes, the crime scene that I think that we've all experienced. And, I'm sure that we will continue to experience, unfortunately, but together we can be detectives and figure out how we can prevent some of those crimes in the future.
I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. You can check the episode notes for all the relevant links. I also invite you to follow me on Instagram and on my website, branderman.design. Follow the podcast in your favorite app so you don't miss the next episode of Branderman, the podcast where we try to uncover how to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society through package design.